When I found out my parents had cashed out my college fund to help my brother's business, I couldn't even speak. They called it a family decision. Funny how family only means me when they need money. That day, I learned blood doesn't equal loyalty, just obligation. Quick, hit like, share with your friends, and subscribe. This story is about to get intense. I used to think life was predictable. Not easy, but predictable in that soft, comforting way routines have of convincing you everything will go according to plan. My plan had always been clear: study hard, earn my way into a good college, make my parents proud, and maybe, just maybe, repay them for all the years they'd spent scraping by so I could have a chance at something better. It wasn't a dream wrapped in fireworks or glitter. It was simple, like a promise whispered in quiet hours. But the thing about promises is, they only mean something if both sides remember them. It was a late summer evening when I came home from my part time job at the cafe. The air smelled faintly of burnt toast and cheap detergent, a scent I'd come to associate with our kitchen since Mom discovered the joy of budget cooking. I remember stepping into the house, the screen door creaking behind me, and hearing my brother Mark laughing from the living room. His laugh was full bodied, careless, the kind of laugh people have when they have never known what it's like to count change at a gas station. He'd always been the golden one, the older brother with charm that could melt tension in any room, the kind of guy who could fail at something and still walk away with applause. "Hey, look who decided to grace us with their presence," he said, grinning as I set my bag down. "Some of us actually have to work," I said, only half teasing. He smirked, the way he always did when he knew he'd won before I even entered the ring. Mom was at the table, papers spread out like a fan in front of her, a glass of white wine next to her untouched plate. Dad was leaning against the counter, scrolling through something on his phone. The air felt heavy, and I noticed it right away, the kind of thickness that settles in before bad news arrives. "What's going on?" I asked. Mom looked up, her lips tightening in that way they did when she was rehearsing her words before they left her mouth. "Sit down, sweetheart," she said softly. That tone. That was the tone people used before saying something they hoped you wouldn't hate them for. I sat. Mark didn't look at me. He was drumming his fingers on the table, avoiding my eyes. Dad finally put his phone down. "We've been meaning to talk to you about something," he said. "It's about your college fund." My stomach dropped. For a moment, I thought they were about to tell me something good, that it had finally matured, that maybe there was more in there than I thought. But then I saw Mom's eyes, glassy but dry, and Mark's restless fingers, and I knew this wasn't that kind of conversation. "What about it?" I asked. There was a pause, long enough that the hum of the refrigerator filled the silence. Then Mom said it, her voice trembling just enough to make it sound fragile. "We used it, honey, for your brother." The words hung in the air like smoke after an explosion. I blinked. "You used it? What do you mean, used it?" Dad cleared his throat. "Mark's business needed a boost. It's a family investment. You know he's been working on that auto shop idea for years, and he finally got the opportunity." "You took my college fund?" My voice cracked on the last word. "The one you promised was for me?" "It's still for the family," Mom said quickly, reaching for my hand. "And you're part of the family. When Mark's business takes off, we'll all benefit." I pulled my hand back. "That's not the same thing." Mark finally looked at me, but there was no apology in his eyes. "Hey, relax, okay? It's not like I stole it." Mom and Dad agreed. It was a family decision. Family decision? I laughed, but it came out brittle, like glass under pressure. "Since when does family decision mean everyone but me?" No one said anything. The only sound was the ticking of the old kitchen clock, each second slicing the air thinner. I stood up, the chair scraping against the linoleum. "You told me I didn't need to take out loans because you were saving for me. You said that fund was locked until I started college." "It was," Dad said, not looking at me. "But things change, son. Mark needed a chance. He's older, he's trying to get his life together, and I'm what? A backup plan?" "Don't talk like that," Mom whispered. "We love you. We just..." We had to make a choice. That word, choice, hit me like a slap because that's what it was, a choice between me and him. And they didn't choose me. I walked out before I could say something I'd regret. The screen door banged shut behind me, echoing across the quiet neighborhood. The sky was turning purple, the kind of dusky color that makes everything feel softer, but nothing about that moment felt soft. My hands were shaking. I wanted to scream, but the air felt too thick to breathe, let alone shout. I ended up walking to the park a few blocks away, where the streetlights flickered and the benches creaked when you sat too fast. I sat there for a long time, staring at the cracked pavement, trying to figure out if maybe I'd misunderstood. Maybe there was something I wasn't hearing right. But no, the truth was simple. They'd taken what was mine and given it to him. And they'd done it with the calm certainty of people who believed they were doing the right thing. The night sounds grew louder. Crickets, a distant car engine, the hum of someone's sprinkler system. I pulled out my phone and stared at my college acceptance letter again, the one I'd saved as a screenshot months ago. I remembered how proud they'd looked when I got it, how Dad had said, "You earned this, we'll take care of the rest." That word again, we. It had always meant them. When I finally went home, the house was dark. I went straight to my room, shut the door, and lay on my bed staring at the ceiling. My mind kept replaying their words in loops that wouldn't stop. Family decision. For the family. You'll benefit too. I didn't cry, not then. The anger was too loud for tears. But deep down beneath the noise, something small and fragile cracked quietly. A kind of trust I hadn't realized was breakable. Over the next few days, I moved through the house like a ghost. They tried to talk to me, Mom bringing my favorite meals, Dad offering to sit down and go over options. But every time they spoke, it felt like static. Their words didn't mean anything anymore. Mark, of course, acted like nothing happened. He'd leave early in the mornings, keys jingling in his hand, all excited about business plans and projections. Sometimes he'd stop by my room and try to make small talk. "You should come by the shop sometime, see what we're building." I didn't even look up from my laptop. "What you're building?" I corrected. He sighed. "You're really going to hold this against me? We're family." And that was the thing. Family was supposed to mean something, but in that house, it had become a weapon. Something they could swing when they needed to make you feel guilty for wanting what was yours. Weeks went by, and the bitterness became routine. Then one afternoon, I came home early from work and heard voices in the kitchen, low, tense, like they didn't want to be overheard. "You told him it was temporary," Mom was saying. "I did," Dad replied. "But you and I both know we're not getting that money back anytime soon. The shop's not turning a profit." Mark said, "Mark says a lot of things." There was a pause, then the sound of Mom sighing. "He's trying, James. We can't let him fail." "And what about Alex?" Dad asked quietly. "What if we let him down too?" "Don't," she said sharply. "He'll understand eventually. He's young. He has time." Something in my chest twisted. Understand? What was I supposed to understand? That my future was negotiable? That love had fine print? I stepped back quietly and went upstairs before they noticed me. I closed my door, sat on my bed, and stared at the wall for a long time. My mind felt like a storm. All noise and fragments, no clear direction. That was the night I decided to change the rules. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let this be the end of my story. And I wasn't going to let them write it for me. The next morning, the house smelled like coffee and quiet regret. Mom was humming softly in the kitchen, the same tune she always hummed when she was pretending nothing was wrong. I stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her pour coffee into Dad's chipped mug, the one that said, "World's Gone, Dad," a joke gift from me when I was 10. The irony burned now. "Morning," she said without turning around. "Morning," I muttered, pulling a glass from the cabinet. She tried to meet my eyes, but I kept mine on the countertop. It was strange how easily silence could grow between people who used to talk about everything. She finally broke it. "I was thinking we could go over some scholarship options this weekend. I know things didn't Go how you wanted, but maybe there's still a way to make it work. Maybe he'll, I said. It wasn't that I didn't want to go to college anymore. I did, more than ever. But I didn't want to do it the way they wanted me to, as the grateful kid who understood family sacrifices. No, if I went now, it would be on my own terms. When I got to work that day, the cafe on the corner near Maple Avenue, everything smelled of roasted beans and old wood polish. It was the kind of place where regulars came to complain about life over bitter espresso. My boss, Lydia, was behind the counter, counting bills with her usual mechanical rhythm. You look like you didn't sleep, she said without glancing up. Didn't, I replied, tying my apron. Boy trouble? She teased. Family trouble, I said. She finally looked up, her eyes softening. Lydia was the kind of person who'd been through enough to read the shape of someone's pain without asking. Ah, that kind. I smiled faintly. Yeah, that kind. The day passed in a blur of orders and chatter, but every time I glanced at my phone, at the university's acceptance email still sitting there like an unopened door, I felt something growing inside me. Not anger exactly, something colder. A decision taking shape in the quiet corners of my mind. After my shift, I stopped by the old library downtown. It was nearly empty, just the hum of the AC and the faint squeak of shoes against linoleum. I went straight to the computer terminals and started searching. Financial aid, emergency grants, part time programs. I made lists. I calculated numbers. I wasn't going to beg my parents for help anymore. I'd find another way. But even as I worked, I couldn't shake the image of Mark's smug grin when he'd said, it was a family decision. The words looped in my head until they lost meaning and became just noise. I. By the time I walked home, the streetlights had come on. Our house glowed faintly from the inside, warm, inviting, deceitful. Through the living room window, I saw them laughing. Mom, Dad, Mark. Takeout containers on the coffee table. The kind of laughter that belonged to people who had nothing to feel guilty about. I stood outside for a full minute before walking in. The laughter stopped almost instantly. Hey, bud, Dad said, awkwardly setting down his drink. We got Chinese tonight. You want some? I looked at the table. Sweet and sour chicken, noodles, spring rolls. All my favorites. Guilt food. I'm not hungry, I said. Mom frowned. Alex, you have to eat. Not hungry. I started up the stairs, but Mark called after me. Come on, man, don't be like that. We're all trying here. I stopped mid-step. The words were simple, but the tone, the easy entitlement of it, made something inside me snap. I turned around slowly. Trying? You think I don't notice how comfortable you are now? Driving around in Dad's car, throwing money at a business that doesn't even have customers yet? Hey, he said, standing up. Watch it. I'm working hard for this. Working hard? I said. You mean working hard at spending other people's money? Alex, Dad warned, but I was past the point of caring. You didn't even ask me, I said, looking between them. You just decided, like I was a child, like what I wanted didn't matter. Mom's voice trembled. We were trying to help. No, I said quietly. You were trying to help him. Don't twist it into something noble. For a long second, no one spoke. Mark looked uncomfortable, like he wanted to say something but couldn't find the right words. Finally, he muttered, It's not my fault they trust me more. The air left my lungs all at once. Mom gasped. Mark? But it was too late. The damage was done. I walked upstairs without another word, closed my door, and let the silence swallow me whole. That night, I lay awake listening to the house creak and shift. Every sound felt magnified. The hum of the fridge, the faint murmur of the TV downstairs. My family's voices had once been my comfort. Now they were just reminders. At some point, I started writing. I didn't know why. Maybe to make sense of things. Maybe because putting words on paper made me feel like I still had control over something. I wrote about the fund, about the betrayal, about the hollow way Mom's voice cracked when she said, family decision. When I finished, I folded the page and slipped it into my desk drawer. It wasn't a plan yet, just a seed. Days turned into weeks again, and slowly, life in the house returned to its false rhythm. Mark's business, the auto shop, became the new family obsession. He'd come home late, covered in grease, talking about investors and equipment and big breaks. Dad listened like every word was gold. Mom smiled like she'd birthed a genius. I stayed quiet, working more shifts at the cafe, saving every penny I could. Lydia noticed, of course. "You're burning out," she said one afternoon. "Not yet," I said, forcing a smile. "Give me a few more months." She frowned. "Whatever's driving you, just don't let it eat you. You're too young to sound that tired." But I was tired. Not from work, from disappointment. Then one evening, when I came home, I found Mark in the driveway, sitting in his truck with the engine off. The window was down and he was staring at his phone, jaw tight. "You okay?" I asked before I could stop myself. He looked up, startled. Yeah, just, it's nothing." He didn't sound convincing. "Problems with the shop?" I asked. He hesitated, then sighed. "You could say that. The supplier's been late with shipments, and Dad's been getting antsy about the returns. He doesn't say it, but I know he's worried." I nodded. For a brief moment, we were just brothers again. Two people standing on the same ground instead of opposite sides. But then he added, "It'll work out. It always does." And just like that, the illusion broke. He drove off and I went inside, where Mom was sitting at the dining table with a pile of bills. She looked up when I entered. "Everything okay?" I asked. She gave a thin smile. "Just numbers. They always find a way to pile up." I didn't ask which numbers. I didn't have to. That night, while they slept, I went downstairs. The kitchen was dark except for the soft glow of the oven clock. I moved quietly, careful not to wake anyone, and opened the drawer where Dad kept his files, the ones he thought no one knew about. Inside were papers, receipts, loan documents. My fingers froze when I saw one marked college fund withdrawal, full balance. It was dated 6 months earlier, long before they told me. So it hadn't been a desperate, last-minute decision. They'd done it quietly, intentionally, and then lied for months. I felt the blood drain from my face. I put the papers back exactly where I found them and went upstairs. But sleep was impossible. My thoughts were racing, not with anger now, but calculation. The next day, I asked Lydia if she needed extra help on weekends. "You sure?" she asked. "That's a lot of hours." "I'm sure." She nodded. "You got it." From then on, I worked every shift I could. Morning, night, double shifts. I was exhausted, but I didn't care. I stopped eating dinner with them, stopped talking unless necessary. My world shrank to three things: work, save, plan. By early fall, I'd saved enough to pay for one semester at community college. It wasn't the dream school, but it was something I earned myself. I didn't tell them. Not yet. I wanted to see how long it would take before they noticed. Weeks passed and they didn't. Not even when I started taking online classes at night. Then one day, Mark came home angry. I could hear him shouting from the driveway, "You said you'd cover the rest. You promised, Dad." My heart thudded. I stayed upstairs listening. "I said I'd help." Dad's voice snapped back. "But the loan officer called today. KO, you're overextended. You've burned through most of what we gave you." Mark's voice cracked. "It's not my fault the market tanked." Mom's voice joined, pleading, "Both of you, please." But they kept arguing, voices rising until it was just noise. That's when I realized something. The cracks were forming, not just in their finances, but in their belief that Mark was untouchable. That night, after everyone went to bed, I went into the living room. Their argument still echoed faintly in my head. I sat on the couch, staring at the family photo on the mantel, the one from when I was 15. We all looked happy. I remembered that day vividly. Dad had just told us the college fund was safe and growing. He'd looked right into the camera when he said it. I reached out and touched the frame. Then, for the first time since that night in the kitchen, I felt something new. Not anger, not sadness. Clarity. If loyalty was a currency, then mine had already been spent. And now it was time to make them see the cost. It was around late October when everything started to shift again. The air had that kind of sharp chill that seeps through old windows, the kind that makes you notice silence more than usual. Our house, once always humming with background noise, Mom's music, Dad's phone calls, Mark's constant chatter, had gone quiet. Too quiet. At first, I thought it was just tension lingering from their argument. But after a while, I realized it wasn't just silence. It was fear. Not mine, theirs. Mark had been spending longer hours at the shop. When he did come home, he barely spoke, just dropped his jacket, muttered something about being tired, and locked himself in his room. Mom looked at him the way people look at fragile things, with love and panic mixed together. Dad, on the other hand, had gone distant, his voice clipped, his movements tight. Something was breaking in the house, and they were trying to pretend it wasn't. I should have felt satisfaction. Maybe a part of me did, a quiet, guilty flicker of it. But mostly I felt the weight of inevitability, like I was watching a slow-motion car crash I couldn't stop. One night, I came home from my night class and found Dad in the kitchen, sitting in the dark with a glass of something amber in his hand. The only light came from the fridge door, left slightly open. "Didn't know anyone was up," I said. He didn't look at me right away. "Couldn't sleep." I leaned against the doorway. "Rough day?" He chuckled, a low, humorless sound. "You could say that." I waited. He'd always been the kind of man who needed silence to open up. Finally, he sighed. "You know, when you're a parent, you think your job is to make everything better, fix things before they break. But sometimes you just end up breaking things faster, trying to fix them." His voice was unsteady, something I wasn't used to. My father wasn't the kind to show cracks. "What's going on, Dad?" He swirled the drink in his glass. "The shop's in trouble. Mark's in trouble." I stayed quiet. He made some poor decisions. Took on more debt than he could handle. Some of it's tied to us now. He paused, glancing at me. I should have said no when he asked, but your mother. He stopped himself. "We thought we could help him find his footing." "By cashing out my future," I said before I could stop myself. He flinched slightly. "I know." It was the first time he'd said it out loud like that. Not defending, not rationalizing, just acknowledging. I didn't realize how much I needed to hear it until it happened. "I didn't mean for things to go this way," he said softly. "We thought he'd turn it around." "And you thought I'd understand," I said. He didn't answer. For a moment, I almost forgave him. Sitting there in the half-light, he looked older, smaller, like the weight of every wrong choice had settled into his shoulders. But forgiveness felt like something too expensive to give. Not yet. The next morning, the house was in chaos. Mark's voice thundered through the hallway, angry and desperate. "You can't just pull out now, Dad. I've got contracts waiting." Dad's reply was sharp. "Contracts you can't fulfill. I warned you, Mark. I told you to slow down. I just need a little more time." I walked into the living room. Both of them froze when they saw me. "Morning," I said flatly. Mark looked like he hadn't slept in days. Eyes bloodshot, stubble creeping along his jaw. "Not a good time, man." "When is it ever?" I said. He glared. "You think this is funny? You think watching me struggle makes you feel better?" I didn't answer because maybe it did. Dad stepped between us. "Enough, both of you." But it was too late. The old resentment was boiling over, years of quiet comparisons finally spilling into the open. "You were always the favorite," Mark spat. Don't act like the victim now." I laughed, short, sharp. "The favorite? You got my college fund, my parents' trust, and apparently their entire savings. What exactly did I get?" He looked ready to throw a punch, but Mom rushed in then, panic in her voice. "Stop it, both of you, please." We froze. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her hands trembling. She looked at us like we were strangers wrecking her home. "Mark," she said softly, "maybe it's time to take a step back. Let things cool off." He stared at her like she'd betrayed him too. Then, without a word, he grabbed his keys and left. The sound of his truck fading down the street left an ache in the air. Later that night, while they sat in the living room whispering about next steps, I went to my room and opened my laptop. I hadn't planned to dig deeper, not really, but curiosity and anger make dangerous allies. I typed in the name of Mark's shop, Westfield Auto and Custom. Their website looked professional enough, sleek photos, bold fonts, promises of quality craftsmanship. But something was off. I clicked through the About Us section. The address listed wasn't the same one I remembered. Weird. I copied the address and pasted it into Google Maps. It led to an abandoned lot on the outskirts of town. No building, no sign, nothing. A chill crept up my spine. I checked the business registration records next. It wasn't hard, public information if you knew where to look. The registration had been filed under his name and someone else's. Not Dad's. Not any investor I recognized. It was Mom's. Filed nearly a year before they'd told me about the college fund. I sat back staring at the screen. My hands felt cold. It hadn't been Mark's idea, it had been hers. The next day, I couldn't look at her the same way. Every time she smiled, every time she asked about my day, all I could see was the signature on that document, her name beside his, the quiet betrayal dressed up as love. That evening, she called me into the kitchen. "You're working too hard," she said. "You should take a day off. You'll burn out." I almost laughed. "I'm fine." "You're not. You look exhausted." Maybe that's just what happens when you have to rebuild everything on your own. Her expression faltered. "Alex," I met her gaze. "Why didn't you tell me? About the business? About your name on the paperwork?" Her face went pale. "Where did you—" She stopped herself. "You shouldn't have been snooping." "That's your answer?" I said quietly. "You stole my future and you're worried about privacy?" She sank into a chair, pressing her fingers to her temples. "It wasn't like that. Your brother needed help. He was drowning. We thought if we invested together, it would be easier for him to get started." "You didn't invest," I said. "You gambled. With my money." Her voice cracked. "You think I don't know that? You think I sleep at night knowing what we did?" For the first time, she looked human again. Vulnerable. But sympathy didn't come easy anymore. "Then why keep lying?" I asked. She looked at me for a long moment. "Because if I admitted it, I'd lose both of you, and I couldn't handle that." I didn't know what to say. The silence between us felt like a canyon. That night, Mark didn't come home. Dad called him twice. Voicemail both times. Mom sat at the table staring at nothing. Hours passed. Midnight came and went. Then, just after 2 a.m., we heard the truck pull into the driveway. Mark stumbled in, reeking of alcohol, his jacket half off his shoulder. "Where the hell have you been?" Dad barked. "Out," Mark slurred. "Don't worry, I didn't spend your money this time." "Jesus, Mark." "I'm fine," he snapped, staggering toward the stairs. "You don't care anyway. None of you do." He tripped on the last step, caught himself, then disappeared into his room, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the picture frames. No one said a word. The next morning, he was gone. No note, no call. Just gone. Mom fell apart quietly, sitting in the kitchen with a cup of coffee that went cold hours ago. Dad called the shop, friends, anyone who might have seen him. Nothing. 2 days passed. Then the police showed up. They'd found his truck on the edge of the river. Door open, keys still in the ignition. No sign of him. Mom's scream echoed through the house like something breaking in half. The search lasted 3 days. Divers, helicopters, news vans, all of it a blur. They never found him. Only his wallet, waterlogged and half buried in the mud. The official report said, presumed drowning. But something in me refused to believe it. Mark wasn't the type to disappear quietly. He was impulsive, yes. Reckless. But not suicidal. At the funeral, an empty casket, just a photo and flowers, I watched Mom crumble. Dad stood beside her, hollow-eyed, gripping her shoulder like it was the only thing keeping him upright. People whispered condolences, patted my back, told me to stay strong. I smiled and nodded, numb. But inside, a storm was building, because the night before the police found his truck, I'd received a message. No name, no number, just a text. "You were right. About them. Don't trust anyone." It came from Mark's phone. I never told my parents. And that was the moment everything changed. The days that followed were like walking through fog. I moved through the house as if it belonged to someone else, each step careful, measured. Mom and Dad existed in a state of fragile panic, whispering behind closed doors, eyes darting whenever I passed. The absence of Mark, or the idea of him, hung over the house like a shadow. People talk about grief as a thing that smothers you in waves, but this wasn't grief. This was a quiet, slow burning unease that infected every corner of the rooms, every object, every word spoken. I tried to focus on school, my part time work, saving every possible dollar for tuition. But my mind kept circling back to the last message. You were right. About them. Don't trust anyone. Mark's phone sat in my drawer, untouched and silent. Every time I thought about texting the number back, my fingers froze. Could it really be him? And if it was, why reach out in such a cryptic, cold way? The house itself seemed to conspire with my confusion. In the living room, the couch cushions were always misaligned. The kitchen table littered with papers Mom clearly didn't have the strength to sort. Every day, I'd find little reminders of her anxiety. A half-finished crossword, a lipstick-stained coffee mug, receipts with numbers scribbled in the margins, and every time I saw them, I couldn't decide whether to feel pity or disgust. One evening, I couldn't take it anymore. I went downstairs while they were sleeping and grabbed Dad's laptop. He always left it unlocked when he went to bed. It wasn't about invading his privacy. It was about understanding, about finally knowing everything. The screen lit up with files, spreadsheets, and emails. Most of it was mundane, bills and supplier invoices, notes on the shop. But there was something else. Correspondence between Mom and a financial consultant, detailed plans, spreadsheets with numbers I barely understood but could feel gnawing at my chest. They hadn't just taken my college fund, they'd taken my future, my security, and hidden every step behind layers of careful planning. And yet, beneath it all, I could see the strain. The consultant's emails weren't praising Mom's decisions. They were warnings, recommendations to back away, to cut losses. Every one of her replies was defensive, pleading, rationalizing. She wasn't malicious, not entirely. She was terrified. Terrified of losing Mark. Terrified of losing the family she thought she could control. I sank into the couch, the glow of the laptop painting my face in harsh light. I realized then that my anger was tangled with fear. Fear of how deep this went. Fear of what else they might have hidden. Fear that I'd been living in a house that had never been entirely real. The next day, I confronted Mom. I saw the emails, I said, voice low. She froze, hand tightening around her coffee mug. Alex, don't, just explain, please. Her eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back. I thought I was helping him. I thought we were giving him a chance. I never meant to hurt you. Your future. I thought you could figure something else out. I thought you were strong enough. I stared at her. Strong enough? I had felt strong all my life because I believed in them, because I trusted them. And now, that trust had been stripped away. You were strong enough to be used, I said softly. She flinched but didn't argue. For hours afterward, I wandered the neighborhood. The streets were quiet, leaves rustling underfoot. The twilight painted everything in golden purple, beautiful and cruel all at once. I realized then that I had to decide what I was going to do next. Not about my parents, not about Mark, but about me. I started keeping notes, writing every conversation, every financial detail I could find, every memory of promises broken. I wasn't sure what I would do with it, but I knew I couldn't keep walking blind anymore. A week later, I got another message. Same number. Short. Simple. Meet me. Tomorrow. Near the river. My stomach dropped. My first instinct was to ignore it, but something inside me, a thread of hope, or perhaps fear, urged me forward. The next evening, I walked along the riverbank. The air smelled faintly of earth and water, damp and heavy. Street lamps cast pale pools of light, and the distant hum of the city reminded me that life went on, even when mine felt suspended. A figure appeared ahead, leaning against a railing. The silhouette was unmistakable. Mark! I stopped. My heart raced. You're alive, I whispered. He turned, face pale under the streetlight, eyes haunted. Yeah, alive. For a long moment, we just looked at each other. So much had happened. So much had been lost, but he was here, breathing, real. And yet, something in his expression told me the story wasn't over. Why the message? I asked finally. He shrugged, avoiding my eyes. I needed to know if you were alone, if I could trust you. I felt a shiver run down my spine. Trust. The word had been hollow in my life for weeks. Could I trust him? Did I even want to? I've been watching, he said quietly. Watching what they've done, what mom's done. Dad, too, and I realized it's worse than I thought. They aren't bad people. Not really, but they lie, they manipulate. They do whatever it takes to keep the family together, even if it destroys us in the process. I nodded slowly. I know. Which is why I needed to see you, he said. I couldn't do this alone, and I needed to make sure you were okay. The weight of his words pressed down on me. For the first time, I felt the cracks in my armor begin to soften. He wasn't the golden brother I'd hated. He was scared. He was lost, just like the rest of us. We spent hours there, leaning against the railing, talking quietly about everything: the fund, the shop, the lies, the fear. And slowly, we began to map out the truth, piece by piece. It wasn't easy. Every revelation cut a little deeper, but together it felt possible. Over the following days, we started gathering evidence not for revenge, but for clarity. Bank statements, emails, contracts, the little inconsistencies that had always whispered in the back of my mind. Every discovery was a new layer of understanding, not just about what they'd done, but why. Mom and Dad weren't villains. They were flawed humans, trapped by fear and love and mistakes they couldn't undo. Mark wasn't innocent either. He had taken risks, made bad choices, but he was trying to survive in a world that hadn't taught him how. One evening, sitting on my bed with Mark across from me, I realized something terrifying. The real danger hadn't been losing money, or losing trust, or even losing Mark. The danger had been believing that love and loyalty were guarantees, that blood could protect you. That family meant safety. It didn't. Not always. And yet, standing there with him, I also realized that family could be rebuilt. Slowly, carefully. Not because of obligation, but because of choice. The riverbank, the laptop, the quiet hours of investigation, they all became our secret. A world apart from the house where lies had grown like ivy. We didn't have answers yet, not completely. But we had each other. And for the first time in months, that felt enough. That night, I sat by my window, looking out at the city lights reflected on the wet streets. I thought about the messages, the evidence, the conversations. I thought about the parents I loved but could no longer trust, and the brother I had resented but now understood in a way I never had before. And in that moment, I made a decision. I would take my life back, piece by piece, not through anger, not through revenge, but through knowing, through clarity, through refusing to let them define my future anymore. It was terrifying, the weight of it, the enormity of starting over while still surrounded by the same people who had broken me. But for the first time, I also felt a flicker of something else: hope. Because sometimes the hardest battles aren't against the people who betray you. They're against the fear and doubt that linger long after the betrayal is done. And I was ready to fight. The weeks that followed were quiet but tense. Mark and I worked together in silence more often than not, piecing together the fragments of our family's secrets. We didn't speak much to Mom and Dad, at least not in the same way we had before. Every interaction was measured, careful. The house still felt heavy, like it had absorbed the echoes of every betrayal and whispered lie, but within that weight, there was a strange clarity. A sense that the storm, though far from over, was finally being named. One afternoon, I found myself in the old library again, surrounded by stacks of papers, spreadsheets, and notes I'd been keeping meticulously. Mark sat across from me, tracing his finger along a line of numbers, frowning. "We're close," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I can feel it. If we can just untangle this mess, we might actually understand what happened." All of it. I nodded. I'd been asking myself the same question for months. Why? Why did they make that decision? Why did mom hide the truth? Why had dad let it happen? And most of all, why had it taken such a breach of trust to make us see the fragility of our family? By evening, we had uncovered enough to see the bigger picture. The college fund had not simply been used, it had been leveraged, gambled in ways that none of us fully understood until now. But more importantly, we saw patterns, decisions driven by fear, by hope, by a desperate need to hold the family together even as it splintered. The realization cut deeper than anger ever could. It wasn't just the money, it was the way intentions, no matter how pure, could become instruments of harm. That night, I stood at the window of my room, looking out at the city skyline glowing in the cold autumn air. Mark was asleep in the guest room, exhausted from our day of research. Downstairs, I could hear Mom quietly crying, the sound muffled by the walls but no less raw. Dad sat at the dining table, head in his hands, the weight of his choices finally resting on him. I realized something then. Betrayal isn't always about malice. Sometimes it's about flawed love. Sometimes it's about people trying to protect what they think is important. And failing spectacularly. I felt a strange mix of sorrow, relief, and determination. Sorrow for the trust lost, relief for the truths finally uncovered, and determination to reclaim what had been taken. Not the money, not even the apologies, but the ability to chart my own path. The next morning, Mark left for the shop, though the mood was different. No bravado, no smugness, only quiet acknowledgement of what had happened and a tentative understanding of what we still needed to repair. Mom and Dad were waiting for me in the kitchen. We didn't speak immediately, we just sat, the silence thick but bearable, filled with the unspoken realization that everything had shifted irreversibly. "I'm sorry," Mom said finally, her voice trembling. I I thought I was helping. I was wrong." Dad nodded. "We were wrong, both of us. We wanted to protect him, but we failed to protect you. I see that now." I didn't respond immediately. Words felt inadequate. Instead, I let the silence stretch, letting them feel the gravity of the confession, the truth that had been buried under years of assumption and half-truths. Then I spoke. "I understand why you did it. That doesn't mean I forgive it yet, but I understand." Mom's shoulders sagged, relief mingling with grief. Dad's expression softened, almost imperceptibly. And for the first time, the air in the house felt lighter. Not because the damage was erased, but because acknowledgement had opened a new space. Weeks later, I enrolled officially in community college, balancing work and classes with a newfound clarity. I spoke with Mark more often, cautiously rebuilding our relationship not as siblings divided by favoritism, but as two people who had endured the same storm and emerged with understanding. Mom and Dad, though still flawed, were learning, slowly, that protecting the family sometimes required honesty over intention, transparency over fear. I still think about that night at the river, the message, the cryptic warning. It wasn't just Mark who needed to be trusted, it was the process, the willingness to look closely at what had been hidden and confront it, however painful. The future I had envisioned, the college, the independence, the freedom, was no longer a given. But I had learned that the most important inheritance isn't money or opportunity. It's perspective, resilience, and the courage to reclaim one's life after betrayal. Sitting by my window at night, I sometimes ask myself questions that have no easy answers. What does it really mean to be family? Is loyalty owed or is it earned? Can love survive deceit, or does truth always demand a reckoning? And, most chillingly, can someone truly forgive when the very foundation of trust has been shaken? I don't have the answers, not fully. But I've learned to live with the questions because the questions, messy and unresolved, are what make us human. And perhaps if we face them honestly, they're what allow us to rebuild what was broken, one fragile piece at a time. As I turn off the light and close my eyes, I let the quiet settle around me, no longer heavy but expectant. The storm hasn't passed. Maybe it never will. But now I know I can navigate it because I've survived it. And I've learned that even the deepest betrayals can be transformed into understanding, courage, and finally, choice. Have you ever had a moment when someone you trusted deeply broke that trust? How did it shape your view of family, loyalty, or love? Can a relationship survive once betrayal has taken root? Or is the act itself an irreversible turning point? And most importantly, when faced with deception by those closest to you, how do you choose between forgiveness and self preservation? And what does that choice say about who you really are?